In a world where royal protocol dictates every breath, every glance, every carefully measured step, one woman dared to be gloriously, authentically human. The cameras were rolling. The world was watching. And Princess Catherine, in a single, unguarded moment, reminded us all why fairy tales still matter. What happened at BAFTA 2026 wasn't just about a dress, a speech, or even a royal appearance. It was about the precise second when duty met heart, when tradition collided with truth, and when the future Queen of England showed us that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply be yourself. The story you're about to read isn't just about glamour and gowns. It's about courage in crystal-clear moments, about finding your voice when the whole world is listening, and about the stunning realization that even princesses have to figure out who they really are. This is what really happened that night when the lights dimmed, the curtain rose, and Catherine stepped into a moment that would define not just her reign, but her legacy. The morning of February 18, 2026, arrived with the kind of London drizzle that makes even royal residences feel ordinary. Catherine stood at the tall windows of apartment 1A in Kensington Palace, watching raindrops race down the glass like tears she wasn't allowed to shed. Her reflection stared back at her, and, for a moment, she didn't recognize the woman looking back. 3 years into her role as Princess of Wales, and some days still felt like playing dress-up in someone else's life. Your Royal Highness, we need to discuss tonight's timeline. Rebecca Morrison, her new private secretary, appeared in the doorway with an iPad clutched against her chest like armor. Rebecca was efficient, dedicated, and absolutely terrified of making a mistake. Catherine had tried countless times to get her to relax, but some walls take longer to tear down than others. Of course, Rebecca. But, please, just Catherine when we're alone. We've talked about this. She turned from the window, smoothing down her casual cream sweater. Even her comfortable clothes felt like a costume sometimes. Rebecca consulted her tablet with the intensity of someone decoding nuclear launch codes. The car will arrive at 5:30 sharp. Hair and makeup are scheduled for 2 o'clock. The stylist wants a final fitting at 3:15. And the palace has requested that you review your speech one more time before departing. Catherine nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. Tonight was the British Academy Film Awards, her third time attending as Princess of Wales, but somehow this year felt different. Heavier. The weight of expectation seemed to press down on her shoulders like an invisible crown. The speech sitting on her desk had been written and rewritten 7 times. 7 versions of carefully crafted words that sounded like they could come from any royal before her. Gracious thanks to the film industry. Appreciation for British creativity. Standard royal fare that would please everyone and inspire no one. Rebecca, what do you think makes a moment unforgettable? Her private secretary looked up from the tablet, clearly not expecting philosophical questions at 9 in the morning. I'm not sure I understand, Your Royal Highness. Catherine, she corrected gently. I mean, when you watch a film or attend an event, what makes you remember it years later? What makes it stick? Rebecca considered this carefully. I suppose, authenticity? When someone says something real, something that surprises you because it's true in a way you didn't expect. Catherine smiled. It was the most honest conversation they'd had in months. Exactly. Thank you, Rebecca. That's exactly what I needed to hear. The rest of the morning blurred together in a familiar rhythm of royal duties. Phone calls with charity representatives, briefings on upcoming engagements, reviewing documents that would shape policy she genuinely cared about but felt powerless to truly influence. By lunch, Catherine felt like she was swimming through molasses, every movement deliberate and constrained. At 2 o'clock sharp, the hair and makeup team arrived. Sarah Chen had been doing Catherine's formal looks for 2 years now, and she had a gift for creating styles that looked effortless while being anything but. As Sarah worked, sectioning and pinning Catherine's hair with the precision of a surgeon, Catherine found herself staring at her reflection again. Nervous about tonight? Sarah asked, applying a base that would withstand camera flashes and long ceremonies. Should I be? You tell me. You've been staring at yourself like you're trying to solve a puzzle. Catherine laughed, the sound genuine for the first time all day. Maybe I am. Some days I look in the mirror and think, who is this person? The clothes, the title, the schedule that's planned down to the minute. Sometimes I wonder where I went. Sarah paused, lipstick brush in hand. You know what I think? Tell me. I think the person you were before is still there. She's just wearing fancier clothes now. The question is whether you're brave enough to let her show up tonight. The words hit Catherine like a splash of cold water. Sarah had unknowingly touched on the exact thing that had been bothering her for weeks. She wasn't losing herself in royal duty. She was hiding herself behind it. At 3:15, as scheduled, Maria Santos arrived for the final dress fitting. The gown was stunning, a midnight blue creation that captured light like trapped stars. It was appropriate, beautiful, and completely safe. Everything a future queen should wear. It's perfect, Maria said, adjusting the shoulder straps with an artist's attention to detail. Is it? Catherine asked, studying herself in the full-length mirror. You don't like it? I love it. That's not the problem. Catherine turned, watching how the dress moved, how it transformed her into exactly what everyone expected her to be. Maria, do you ever feel like you're disappearing into your own success? The designer, a woman who had built her career on understanding what her clients needed even when they couldn't articulate it themselves, set down her pins. Every day. The more successful I become, the more people expect me to stay exactly the same. But, staying the same isn't living, is it? No, Catherine said softly. It isn't. What do you really want to wear tonight? The question hung in the air between them. Catherine had been asking herself the same thing, not just about clothes, but about everything. What did she want to say? How did she want to show up? Who did she want to be when the cameras were rolling and the world was watching? Something that feels like me. Maria smiled, the expression of someone who had just been given permission to create magic. Give me an hour. As the afternoon wore on, Catherine found herself thinking about her conversation with Rebecca. Authenticity. The moments that stick because they're true in unexpected ways. She thought about her children, who had no trouble being themselves regardless of who was watching. She thought about William, who had learned to balance duty with identity in ways she was still figuring out. Most of all, she thought about the speech on her desk. 7 versions of the same safe, predictable message. 7 versions of hiding behind protocol when she had the chance to say something that mattered. At 4 o'clock, she made a decision that surprised even her. She picked up the speech, all 7 versions, and dropped them in the wastebasket. Then, she sat down at her desk with a blank piece of paper and began to write. Not as the Princess of Wales. Not as the future queen. Just as Catherine, writing about something she actually cared about. The words came easily, flowing from a place she had kept carefully locked away during public appearances. She wrote about growing up loving films because they showed her worlds where anything was possible. She wrote about the responsibility of storytelling, about how the images we create shape the dreams of children who might grow up to change the world. She wrote about courage, both on screen and off, and how sometimes the bravest thing you can do is show people who you really are. When she finished, she read it through twice. It was nothing like any speech she had given before. It was personal, passionate, and completely unpredictable. It was also absolutely terrifying. Rebecca appeared in the doorway again, right on schedule. Your Royal Highness, it's almost time to begin getting ready. Catherine looked at the speech in her hands, then, at Rebecca's expectant face. Rebecca, I need you to do something for me. And, I need you to trust me, even if it seems crazy. Of course, Your Royal Highness. I'm going to go off script tonight. Completely. And, I need you to not try to stop me. Rebecca's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Your Royal Highness, the palace has approved the current speech. Any changes would need to be reviewed. That's exactly why I'm not going to tell them. Catherine stood up, feeling more awake than she had in months. Rebecca, you asked me what makes a moment unforgettable. I'm about to find out. At 5 o'clock, Maria returned with a garment bag and a smile that suggested she had been having the time of her life for the past hour. "I think you're going to like this." The dress that emerged from the bag was still midnight blue, still elegant, still appropriate for a royal engagement. But it was also unmistakably Catherine. The cut was more modern, the details more personal, the overall effect somehow both more formal and more relaxed. It was a dress that said Princess of Wales and Catherine in the same breath. "It's perfect," Catherine said, and meant it. "There's one more thing." Maria produced a small blue velvet box. "Your grandmother-in-law's sapphire earrings. The Queen Consort thought you might like to wear them tonight." Catherine opened the box to reveal earrings that had witnessed decades of royal history, worn by women who had faced their own moments of choosing between safety and authenticity. Somehow, it felt like a blessing. At 5:20, Catherine stood in front of her mirror one final time. The woman looking back at her was still recognizably the Princess of Wales, but she was also undeniably Catherine. The dress, the earrings, the speech folded carefully in her evening bag, all of it felt like pieces of herself she was finally brave enough to wear in public. "Ready?" Rebecca asked from the doorway, tablet nowhere to be seen. Catherine took a deep breath, thinking about her children, about the films that had shaped her dreams as a girl, about the speech that would either be remembered as genuine or criticized as inappropriate. She thought about authenticity, about courage, about the difference between being perfect and being real. "Yes," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "I think I finally am." The car was waiting, black and gleaming in the February evening. As Catherine settled into the back seat, she felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Not nervousness about getting everything right, but excitement about the possibility of getting something true. London's streets blurred past the window, familiar yet somehow different tonight. In a few hours, she would step onto a red carpet, smile for cameras, and deliver a speech that could change everything or nothing, depending on how brave she was willing to be. The speech in her bag felt like a small revolution, 10 minutes of words that came from her heart instead of a committee. Whether the world was ready for Princess Catherine to show up as simply Catherine remained to be seen. But, as the car moved through the London evening toward the Royal Festival Hall, Catherine realized she was finally ready to find out. The Royal Festival Hall stood like a beacon against London's grey evening sky, its lights cutting through the February drizzle with the kind of magic that only happens when the film industry gathers to celebrate itself. Catherine could see the red carpet from 3 blocks away, a river of crimson flanked by photographers whose camera flashes created their own lightning storm. "Deep breaths, Your Royal Highness," Rebecca murmured from beside her in the car, though Catherine noticed her private secretary looked more nervous than she felt. "Catherine," she corrected automatically, then caught Rebecca's eye. "And I should be the one saying that to you. You look like you're about to face a firing squad." Rebecca managed a weak smile. "I keep thinking about what happens if the palace doesn't appreciate your creative approach tonight." Catherine touched the speech in her bag, her fingers tracing the folded edges of words that felt more like her than anything she'd said publicly in years. "Then, we'll deal with that tomorrow. Tonight, I'm going to be honest. Sometimes that's all you can do." The car slowed as they approached the venue, and Catherine could see the controlled chaos of a major event in full swing. Security personnel spoke into earpieces, event coordinators clutched clipboards like lifelines, and photographers jockeyed for position behind barriers that barely contained their enthusiasm. 3 minutes, the driver announced. Catherine used those minutes to center herself, thinking about why she was really here. Not just for duty or tradition, but because film had always mattered to her. Growing up, movies had been her escape, her education about the wider world, her proof that ordinary people could do extraordinary things. Tonight wasn't about playing a role. It was about honoring something she genuinely loved. The car door opened, and the London evening rushed in, carrying with it the sounds of controlled excitement. Camera flashes erupted like fireworks as Catherine stepped onto the red carpet, her midnight blue dress catching the light in ways that made her feel both elegant and authentic. "Your Royal Highness. Over here." The photographers' calls blended into a symphony of polite desperation, each one hoping for the perfect shot that would grace tomorrow's front pages. Catherine moved down the carpet with practiced grace, stopping for photos, exchanging brief pleasantries with organizers, playing her part in the beautiful theater of a royal appearance. But something felt different tonight. Instead of performing the role of Princess of Wales, she was simply being Catherine, who happened to hold that title. "You look stunning tonight," Amanda Berry, BAFTA's chief executive, appeared at her elbow with the kind of warm professionalism that made events like this possible. "Thank you. I have to say, I'm looking forward to tonight more than usual." Amanda's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Oh? Anything particular you're excited about?" Catherine smiled, thinking about the speech waiting in her bag. "Let's just say I hope everyone's ready for something a little different." Inside the Royal Festival Hall, the atmosphere was electric with the particular energy that comes from gathering Britain's most creative minds in one room. Catherine recognized faces from films that had moved her to tears, made her laugh until her sides ached, or challenged her to think about the world in new ways. "Your Royal Highness," a familiar voice called out, and Catherine turned to see Tom Hardy approaching with his characteristic mix of confidence and unexpected shyness. "Lovely to see you again." "Tom, please, just Catherine tonight. How are you?" They chatted for a few minutes about his latest project, and Catherine found herself genuinely engaged in a way that felt natural rather than dutiful. This was what she loved about these events when she allowed herself to enjoy them, the chance to connect with people whose work enriched millions of lives. "Catherine." The voice belonged to Michaela Seal, whose work Catherine genuinely admired. "I have to say, your support for emerging filmmakers has made such a difference. The young directors I know feel like they actually have champions in unexpected places." "That means everything to me," Catherine replied, and meant it completely. "Art changes the world. The least I can do is try to make space for more voices." As the evening progressed, Catherine realized she was having actual conversations instead of going through the motions of royal small talk. People were responding to something different in her energy, something more present and engaged than her usual public persona. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The ceremony will begin in 5 minutes." Catherine made her way to her designated seat in the front row, acknowledging the warm applause that greeted her arrival. The familiar weight of expectation settled on her shoulders as she sat down, but, instead of feeling burdened by it, she felt energized. Tonight, she would use that attention for something meaningful. The ceremony began with the traditional mix of comedy, celebration, and the occasional technical hiccup that made live events endearingly human. Catherine found herself laughing genuinely at the host's jokes, applauding enthusiastically for winners whose work she actually knew and admired, engaging with the event as a film lover rather than just a royal duty. And now, the host announced as the evening reached its climax, "Please welcome Her Royal Highness, the Princess of Wales, to present the Fellowship Award." The applause was warm and respectful as Catherine made her way to the stage, her midnight blue dress flowing behind her like confidence made visible. She reached the podium and looked out at an audience filled with people whose work she had genuinely admired long before she had any official reason to support them. For a moment, she stood silently, not from nervousness but from the realization that this was her moment. Not the palace's moment, not the institution's moment, but hers. A chance to say something that mattered to people whose opinion she actually valued. "Good evening," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall. "I'm supposed to tell you how honored I am to be here, how much the royal family values the film industry, and how proud we are of British creativity." A subtle tension rippled through the audience. This wasn't how royal speeches typically began. "And all of that is true," Catherine continued, a small smile playing at her lips. "But tonight, I want to talk to you not as the Princess of Wales, but as someone who has loved films since before she knew what a princess was." The attention in the room shifted, becoming more focused, more curious. Even the photographers seemed to lean forward slightly. "When I was 8 years old, my parents took me to see E.T. at our local cinema. I cried when E.T. got sick. I cheered when he came back to life. And I spent weeks afterward building forts in my garden, hoping my own alien friend might appear." Gentle laughter rippled through the audience, but it was the kind of recognition laughter that said, "Yes, we remember being that child too. That film taught me something I've never forgotten. Stories have the power to make us believe in magic, in possibility, in the idea that love can transcend any difference. And, sitting in that dark theater, I learned that sometimes the most profound truths come disguised as entertainment. Catherine paused, feeling the energy in the room shift as people realized they were hearing something unscripted, something real. The film industry doesn't just make movies. You manufacture hope. You create the myths that help us make sense of our world. You show us versions of ourselves we didn't know existed. And, in a time when the world feels increasingly divided, that work isn't just valuable. It's essential. She could see faces in the audience now, individual people hanging on her words instead of politely waiting for her to finish. This year's fellowship recipient embodies everything I've just described. Their work doesn't just entertain. It challenges, it illuminates, it dares us to be braver than we thought possible. But, more than that, they've used their success to lift up voices that might otherwise go unheard. Catherine felt the familiar flutter of nerves, but pushed through it. This was the moment where she either retreated into safe, expected language or committed fully to authenticity. I've been thinking lately about courage. Not the kind of courage that gets you through battle, but the quiet courage of showing up as yourself when everyone expects you to be someone else. The courage of telling stories that matter, even when they're not easy. The courage of using whatever platform you have to make the world a little bit better. The silence in the room was complete now, the kind of attention that rarely graced award ceremonies. We live in times that demand that kind of courage from all of us. And films, at their best, don't just show us that courage is possible. They teach us what it looks like. Catherine reached for the award, a beautiful piece of craftsmanship that represented decades of artistic achievement. So to tonight's recipient, and to everyone in this room, thank you. Thank you for choosing the harder story over the easier one. Thank you for believing that what we imagine can change what we become. And thank you for reminding us that sometimes the most revolutionary thing you can do is tell the truth. She held up the award, its crystal surface catching the stage lights. This fellowship represents more than individual achievement. It represents the power of storytelling to transform not just individual lives, but entire cultures. It's awarded tonight to someone who understands that with great power comes great responsibility, and who has used their gifts to expand our capacity for empathy, understanding, and hope. Catherine paused one final time, looking out at faces that were clearly engaged in a way they hadn't expected to be. Ladies and gentlemen, this year's BAFTA Fellowship is awarded to someone whose work reminds us that cinema at its finest is an act of love. Please join me in celebrating. As she announced the recipient's name, the applause that erupted was different from the polite appreciation that usually greets royal speeches. This was genuine enthusiasm, the kind of response that comes when people feel they've witnessed something real and unexpected. Walking back to her seat, Catherine felt a lightness she hadn't experienced at a public event in years. She had taken a risk, spoken from her heart, and, instead of disaster, she had found connection. That was incredible, Rebecca whispered as Catherine settled back into her seat. I've never heard you speak like that. Catherine smiled, watching as the fellowship recipient took the stage with tears in their eyes. I've never felt brave enough to speak like that. But, as the ceremony continued around her, Catherine realized something important had shifted. She had proven to herself that authenticity and duty weren't mutually exclusive. She could be the Princess of Wales and still be Catherine. She could serve the institution while honoring her own voice. The evening wasn't over yet, but already she knew this night would be remembered. Not just for the beautiful dresses or perfect protocol, but for the moment when a future queen chose vulnerability over safety, and found that sometimes the most royal thing you can do is simply be human. The afterglow of Catherine's speech lingered in the royal festival hall like warmth from a fireplace, transforming what should have been routine post-ceremony networking into something that felt genuinely celebratory. As people began to filter toward the reception area, Catherine found herself surrounded not by the usual polite royal watchers, but by filmmakers, actors, and industry professionals who seemed to want actual conversations. Your Royal Highness, that was extraordinary, Sarah Gavrin, the acclaimed director, approached with obvious enthusiasm. You spoke about films the way filmmakers talk about films. Like they actually matter beyond box office numbers. They do matter, Catherine replied, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing server. And, please, just Catherine tonight. I feel like after that speech, we're past formalities. Sarah smiled, and Catherine noticed how different this interaction felt from her usual post-event conversations. There was an energy here, a sense that people were engaging with her words rather than just her title. I have to ask, said David Oyelowo, joining their small circle, how long have you been thinking about what you set up there? Because that didn't sound like something that came together last week. Catherine laughed, thinking about the 7 discarded speech drafts sitting in her palace wastebasket. In some ways, I've been thinking about it my whole life. But, I only got brave enough to say it this afternoon. Brave is right, interjected Nia DaCosta, whose latest film had garnered critical acclaim and commercial success in equal measure. Do you know how rare it is to hear someone in your position talk about using platform for purpose? Most people at that level play it safe. Safe is overrated, Catherine found herself saying, surprised by her own boldness. And, honestly, what's the point of having a platform if you're too afraid to stand on it? As the conversation continued, Catherine realized something remarkable was happening. These weren't the carefully managed interactions her royal schedule usually included. These were actual exchanges of ideas with people whose work she genuinely respected, and they were responding to her not as a duty but as an equal participant in a conversation about something they all cared deeply about. Catherine. She turned to see Thandai Newton approaching, champagne in hand and a grin that suggested the evening was exceeding expectations. I have to tell you, my daughter watched your speech on the livestream and immediately texted me, Mom, I want to make films that change the world. That's the effect you just had. The comment hit Catherine harder than she expected. Throughout her royal duties, she often wondered about impact, about whether the appearances and speeches actually mattered to anyone beyond the immediate diplomatic necessities. To hear that her words might have inspired a teenager to dream bigger felt more valuable than any positive press coverage. That means everything to me, Catherine replied, her voice catching slightly. That's exactly why tonight mattered. If we can inspire one young person to believe their voice matters, we've done something important. The reception continued around them, but Catherine found herself in the middle of increasingly substantive conversations. Directors shared their struggles with getting meaningful projects funded. Actors discussed the responsibility they felt to choose roles that reflected the world they wanted to see. Producers talked about the delicate balance between commercial viability and artistic integrity. What struck Catherine most was how genuinely these people engaged with the ideas she had expressed in her speech. They weren't humoring her or making polite conversation. They were building on her thoughts, challenging her assumptions, treating her like a fellow traveler in the complex landscape of using art to create positive change. Your Royal Highness, a voice interrupted, and Catherine turned to see James Park, one of the palace's senior communications advisors, approaching with the kind of carefully neutral expression that usually preceded difficult conversations. James, Catherine acknowledged, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest that came with official palace business interrupting genuine moments. Might I have a word? His tone was polite but firm, the diplomatic equivalent of we need to talk. Catherine excused herself from the conversation and followed James to a slightly quieter corner of the reception area, though she noticed Rebecca hovering nearby with obvious anxiety written across her face. That was quite a speech, James began, and Catherine couldn't tell if it was a compliment or a criticism. It was honest, she replied, meeting his gaze directly. Yes, it was. Which is precisely what we need to discuss. James glanced around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. The palace received several calls during the ceremony. The consensus seems to be that while your speech was moving, it was also rather unexpected. Catherine felt a familiar flutter of defensiveness rising in her chest. Unexpected how? You deviated significantly from approved remarks. You spoke about personal experiences. You took positions on the role of art in society that could be interpreted as political. I spoke about the importance of storytelling and courage. If that's political, then we have bigger problems than my speech. James's expression remained carefully diplomatic. Your Royal Highness, I understand your passion for these issues. But there are protocols in place for good reasons. When you speak off script, particularly about topics like the responsibility of platform and the need for courage, it can be interpreted as commentary on current political and social issues. Catherine felt the weight of royal protocol settling back onto her shoulders like a familiar but unwelcome coat. For 2 hours, she had existed in a space where her thoughts and words mattered for their content rather than their compliance with institutional expectations. Now she was being reminded that authenticity, even well-received authenticity, was still a deviation from approved royal behavior. James, did anyone complain about what I actually said, or are they complaining about the fact that I said something they didn't pre-approve? That's not really the point, Your Royal Highness. I think it's exactly the point. Catherine kept her voice low but firm. I gave a speech about the importance of films and storytelling. I shared a childhood memory about going to the cinema. I talked about courage and using whatever platform you have for good. If that's controversial, then our definition of controversy needs examination. Before James could respond, they were interrupted by Dame Helen Mirren, who approached with the kind of presence that made everyone else's concerns seem temporarily less urgent. Catherine, darling, I had to tell you personally how magnificent that speech was, Dame Helen said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had portrayed royalty and understood both its power and its constraints. In 40 years in this industry, I've heard a lot of speeches from a lot of important people. That was the first time I've heard someone speak about films as if they actually watched them rather than just approved of their existence. Catherine found herself caught between James's diplomatic concern and Dame Helen's genuine praise, a perfect encapsulation of the tension between institutional expectations and authentic engagement. Thank you, Dame Helen. That means a great deal coming from you. I hope you'll forgive an old actress for offering unsolicited advice, Dame Helen continued, her eyes twinkling with the kind of wisdom that comes from decades of navigating public attention, but authenticity is never a mistake. Especially when it's in service of something larger than yourself. After Dame Helen moved on, James returned to his concerns, but Catherine noticed his tone had softened slightly. Your Royal Highness, I'm not questioning your intentions or the quality of your remarks. I'm simply suggesting that in the future, perhaps we could find ways to achieve the same impact while working within established frameworks. Catherine looked across the reception, watching as clusters of people continued animated conversations, many of which seemed to be building on themes from her speech. She could see Rebecca talking with increasing confidence to a group of young filmmakers. She could hear laughter and passionate discussion in multiple languages, the sound of people genuinely energized by ideas. James, with respect, I understand your concerns. But, look around this room. When was the last time you saw people this engaged after a royal speech? When was the last time anyone quoted something I said because it actually mattered to them, not just because protocol required them to listen? James followed her gaze, and Catherine saw something shift in his expression as he observed the energy in the room. I'm not suggesting we abandon protocol, Catherine continued. I'm suggesting we remember what protocol is supposed to serve. If the goal is representing the crown with dignity while supporting causes that matter, then tonight was a success by any reasonable measure. Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of several more industry professionals, each wanting to continue discussions sparked by Catherine's speech. As James excused himself, promising to continue their conversation later, Catherine found herself drawn back into the kind of substantive dialogue she had craved without realizing it. Your Highness, said Asif Kapadia, the documentary filmmaker, I wanted to thank you for what you said about courage. Making documentaries about difficult subjects, you're constantly having to choose between the story that's easy to sell and the story that needs telling. Hearing someone in your position acknowledge that tension, it matters more than you might realize. As the evening progressed, Catherine realized she was experiencing something she had rarely felt at official functions, genuine satisfaction. Not the relief of having successfully completed a duty, but the deeper fulfillment that comes from meaningful engagement with work and people you actually care about. Near the end of the reception, she found herself in conversation with a young filmmaker named Kemi, whose debut feature had been nominated in several categories. I have to ask, Kemi said, her voice carrying the slight nervousness of someone meeting royalty combined with the confidence of an artist discussing her craft, do you really watch the films, or do people just brief you about them? Catherine laughed, appreciating the directness of the question. I really watch them. Sometimes I have to watch them after my children are asleep, sometimes I watch them on planes between engagements, but I watch them. I have opinions about them. Tonight, for the first time, I got to share some of those opinions publicly. That's what made tonight different, Kemi replied. We could tell you actually cared about what you were saying. It made us care more too. As Catherine finally made her way toward the exit, she reflected on the evening's unexpected trajectory. She had arrived nervous about deviating from approved remarks and was leaving energized by conversations that had challenged and inspired her. The speech that had worried James had opened doors to exactly the kind of meaningful engagement that made royal duties feel worthwhile. In the car back to Kensington Palace, Rebecca sat quietly for the first few minutes before finally speaking. Your Royal Highness, I owe you an apology. For what? For trying to talk you out of being yourself tonight. That speech, those conversations, the way people responded to you, I've never seen anything like it at a royal event. Catherine smiled, watching London pass by the windows. Rebecca, can I tell you something? For the first time in years, I felt like I was actually doing my job instead of just performing it. What do you mean? I mean using whatever influence I have to support something I actually believe in. Connecting with people doing work that matters. Being authentic while still serving the institution. Tonight proved those things aren't mutually exclusive. As the car pulled through the gates of Kensington Palace, Catherine thought about the conversations that would continue as a result of tonight, the young filmmakers who might feel more supported in taking creative risks, the industry professionals who now saw the royal family as genuine allies rather than just ceremonial supporters. Most importantly, she thought about the speech sitting in her evening bag, the words that had started as a risk and ended as a bridge. Tomorrow there would be discussions with the palace about protocols and procedures. There would be press coverage to analyze and diplomatic implications to consider. But tonight had proven something important: authenticity and duty could coexist. She could be the Princess of Wales and still be Catherine. She could serve the crown while honoring her own voice and values. As she walked through the familiar corridors of her home, still wearing the midnight blue dress that had witnessed her moment of truth, Catherine realized that tonight hadn't just been about giving a good speech. It had been about discovering a new way to inhabit her role, one that made space for both institutional responsibility and personal authenticity. The woman who went to sleep that night was still the Princess of Wales, still bound by duty and protocol and centuries of tradition. But she was also Catherine, who loved films and believed in courage and had finally found the bravery to let those two identities enhance rather than constrain each other. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new expectations, new opportunities to choose between safety and authenticity. But tonight had given her something invaluable, proof that choosing authenticity, even within the constraints of royal duty, was not just possible but powerful. The BAFTA ceremony of 2026 would be remembered for many things, but, for Catherine, it would always be remembered as the night she stopped performing her role and started living it.